Prior to taking humanities, we all had pre-existing ideas of knowledge. For my past 2 semesters of college, I've taken classes in science, history, English, art, and music, and in these classes I've overall taken what I've learned to be as true. I mean, if you read about a concept in a textbook, why shouldn't it be correct? But what if it isn't? What if my perception of knowledge has been misguided or incorrect? Throughout this semester, the humanities have encouraged me to question how I approach knowledge and how I determine truth. This investigation has yielded shocking results that have made me rethink much of what I've learned about in all of the courses I've taken during college. You may be thinking, how can factual knowledge be wrong? What we learn in science is based on evidence, the esteemed scientific method, and objectivity. However, in the field of epistemology, humanists like Gould, Rorty, and Haraway have emphasized that due to the permanence of subjectivity, the complete objectivity, which is a foundation of the sciences, is unreasonable. All of these humanists urge for the sciences to work in conjunction with the humanities in order to improve its understanding of the world. Rorty explains that all individuals affiliate with certain values, and with these similar values form collective groups. Rorty explains that within these groups, individuals decide on their own ideas of truth, which varies between the groups and makes an overarching objectivity impossible. Haraway adds that objectivity is subjective to the individual's personal experience. Haraway supports that current scientific knowledge, thought to be objective, is actually biased because it is formed through an unmarked discourse, which does not include the views of everyone. It does not include everyone's situated knowledges. Certain scientific concepts were investigated over others due to the desire of those given the opportunity to make those scientific inquiries. The supposedly unbiased researchers who are making the observations in groundbreaking scientific studies may have noticed different occurrences than if somebody else was making those same observations.
Similarly, the wars that we've learned about in our history classes have been told through the lens of those who wrote their histories. The textbooks that we've read on colonization have been told from the perspective of the Europeans who found land and opportunity, not from the Native Americans who were oppressed by the Europeans' entrance. The field of historiography questions how we decide what gets included in history and what does not. Marx and Fukuyama stress that history is based on ideas, which create a grand narrative. We have learned in history classes that there has been a long peace since the Cold War, as certain ideas have been more widely accepted than others, especially the ones on the superiority of the liberal democracy and capitalism as an economic structure. However, Marx and Fukuyama reject the idea that society has settled in a peaceful state. They challenge that history does not end until we all arrive at the same idea, and that although we have moved past the bipolar Cold War state, our ideological state is still very multipolar and conflicted. Michaels and Scott disagree with Marx and Fukuyama that an end to history is possible, and rather say that history is merely a repetition of ideas. They do, however, agree that this state of peace agreed upon in the historical field is misguided, relating its issues back to those of the impossibility of objectivity and critiquing what has been included in history. They emphasize how gender and race have not been included in the evaluations of history. Psychology has been thought of as a soft science, which in a way forms a middle ground between the humanities and the sciences. Psychology has opened a discussion about morality, ethics, and human nature.
Psychologists have largely agreed that most human occurrences are a product of the combination of nature, the biological, and nurture, the cultural. Appiah would strongly agree with this combination when explaining social instances. For example, Appiah would support that women are more condemned for their sexual promiscuity than men, due to both an evolutionary basis of fraternity uncertainty, which explains that there are higher consequences for men of women having multiple sexual partners, and the cultural basis of the reinforced social norms that degrade the sexual independence of women. However, Sartre would disagree with Appiah as he puts more emphasis on the nurture side. Sartre, a supporter of existentialism, asserts that existence comes before essence, and thus humans determine their own cultural morality. He would encourage psychologists to move away from the evolutionary theories and put more emphasis on cultural theories. In English classrooms, we have discussed where the meaning of these cultural concepts comes from, and the field of textual studies aids this discussion. Saussure and Strauss, structuralists, emphasize that linguistics are culturally developed and based on the context in which they are used. They stress that signifiers, which are the form that the sign takes, influence the signified, or the concept described. They explain how signifiers form binaries in the signified, as you can distinguish a concept based on what it is not. Post-structuralists disagree that binaries are formed because they highlight that a signifier can have multiple signified. Regardless, both camps agree on the importance of word choice in language, which is central to the study of linguistics. In many cases, by choosing a certain word, you're not changing the language, but you're changing the concept or meaning, which is especially important when referring to groups of people that have been oppressed.
This concept of signifiers and signified extends into art in the field of visual culture. According to Panofsky, art is a signifier of a nation's culture.
Many artists would agree on this level of importance placed on art, and this is popularly how art is studied. However, relating back to the issue of objectivity, Preziosi questions the bias in the way in which art is presented. Preziosi explains that curators, subjective individuals, are the ones who decide which pieces of art serve as signifiers for a culture. Again arises the issue of all voices not being equally represented in order to equitably depict culture and art. In a way, the new trend of the digital humanities is providing a solution to Preziosi's problem with objectivity. Through technology and cultural analytics, art can now be looked at more empirically with quantitative data. However, the consequence of this loss of subjectivity and individuality is standardization, which is depicted in recent music trends within cultural studies. Our profit-driven culture has created popular structures which are repeated and sold over and over again. Adorno emphasizes the standardization of particularly pop music, which is highly structured and stays essentially the same even when elements of it are changed. Ferguson addressed how consumers are manipulated into buying the culture they create, that is then produced and sold by a hegemonic power structure. This hegemon determines what is culturally in style, and we buy into it.
My perception for what knowledge is and how it can be determined has been changed throughout this course. We must not rely on textbooks for information, but we must also consider what variables have influenced the textbook itself.